Welcome to the Big Data Cup 3. We've put together this video to help you along. Yes, the deadline's soon, so check on the Big Data Cup website to see the times to submit your applications and look at the rules and regulations. Just want to go over a few points that I'm asked quite often. Number one, it's not meant for commercialization, but it is meant for research and publishing. So if you want to take any of the data sets, please use it in your courses, publish papers, talk about this data. We want to get hockey data out there, especially women's hockey data, in which the Big Data Cup 3 is that normal segment. Also, if you do want to use other data sets, if they are public, that's okay. Just cite them so that the judges know where to find them. So you can use other data sources and you can publish using this data set anytime you want. As well, we put together this video to give you some little bit of tips and tricks. Professor Shuckers is going to talk about insights and statistical analysis. Allison Lucan from the Seattle Kraken is going to talk to you about using communication tools, visualizations to get your presentation over that finish line. So sit back, relax, take some tips and tricks, and good luck with the Big Data Cup 3. Thank you to the TD Data Lab at the Rotman School of Management. We will have an event there April 19th for this specific competition. And to everyone else, Stathletes, Carleton, and St. Lawrence that have all helped with this competition, and all of the different hockey executives and analysts that help put us over the finish line to get them judged and to get very great high-level hockey research. So enjoy this video, and hopefully we will see you at the finals.
Hello, greetings. This is Michael Shuckers. This video is for the 2024 Big Data Cup. And I'm just going to talk to you for a little bit here about some thoughts on doing research and doing projects like you'll be doing for the Big Data Cup in hockey analytics. And so I guess on behalf of the Big Data Cup organizing folks, welcome. It's great to have you. We're excited to see what you can create. So let's get started. I'm going to talk about a little bit about some things in terms of observations from what I'm going to call found hockey data. And this is borrowing from an idea from Nick Horton about found data generally. So we've got, we're going to be talking about a statistical mathematical approach. I'm a professor of statistics and data science, St. Lawrence University in Northern New York. We're going to be talking about, when we think about hockey data, it is a many dimensional process. You can think about each player, their location, right, speeds, all of those sorts of things that you can get from the Big Data Cup data. I'm going to use some NHL examples, but all of the things pass over to hockey tracking data that you're going to be working on for this competition. So we model it, or we try to deal with some of the imbalances that come about because the data is not intentionally collected. So really, one of the things we're trying to do is figure out what causes what, right, in terms of hockey analytics. And, you can think of Sarah Nurse, right? Does Sarah Nurse drive higher expected goals? Expected goals being another term for probability of a goal. We often sum up expected goals over a game or a period or, a season. On the power play, right? Is 4 forwards and 1D yield a better power play? And you can think of better power play in terms of a bunch of different metrics for that outcome. But, relative to, say, traditional 3 forwards and 2D, are we getting better outcomes with 4 forwards and 1D? And then, something else here, carrying the puck into the offensive zone, is that going to lead to a higher Corsi 4 percentage? So using a little acronym here that's somewhat common in hockey analytics, but basically shot attempts for as a percentage for your team as a percentage of the total. And for this year's Big Data Cup, right, you're working with special teams, or you're working with zone entries and zone exits. And so some of these outcomes appropriate there. Okay. A lot of this assumes, right, that all else is being equal, right? So when we look at the 4 forwards and 1D, right, we're maybe assuming that the quality of 3 forwards and 2D is the same. when we think about, right, the difference between those two. Is it a difference in the number of forwards, or is it a difference in the players, right? And so if we want to just look at 3 forwards and 1 D, we're assuming that all else is equal there. Okay. For down data, that's generally not true. The norm is that things aren't equal, right? The quality of the players is not the same. The quality of players that Sarah Nurse is going to play for, or Sarah Nurse is going to play with, excuse me, is often higher than when she's not on the ice, just because of the quality of player that she is. So something that we've got to be aware of. This is not design data. And so we've got to account for some of these other factors. And so things get to be multidimensional as we try to account for some of these other factors. And I'm going to give you an example in a little bit here, but I do want to talk about sort of choosing your outcome. So, we've been talking about causes and outcomes here. Really, I have been talking about causes and outcomes here. And one of the things that we want is repeatability or reliability. That is, if we see something in the first half of the season, are we seeing it again in the second half? Right. And so one of the things in sports analytics generally is that we think of something as a skill if it's highly repeatable. That is, right, if someone can't do it, right, they have very good season or very bad season one year, and then is that repeatable, or are those outcomes repeatable again? The other is that we want outcomes directly related to winning. This is often referred to as validity. And there are lots of ways in which those things can happen. Okay. And so, in terms of repeatability and reliability, right, looking at things across seasons, looking at them first half versus second half of a season. And then some really innovative approaches have split data into alternate periods or alternate shots. Again, right, trying to account for all of those factors that are the same, right? Across seasons, right, the drawback is teams change every year. And so who your teammates are or who your goalie might be is going to change, right? First half, second half, again, you have injuries to players there as the season goes on. And so you may have differences there. Whereas if we split within a period or within events within a particular period, right, you're more likely to have a balanced set in both of your groups. The other thing I should mention, though I haven't got it on the slides here, is that the idea of being able to predict out of sample. So if we fit a model and we try to get some explanatory power out of that model for one data set, we want to make sure that what we're doing is not overfitting, and that really goes to some of this repeatability, right? And not fitting it very, very well to that particular data set, but then if we go to predict it on another data set. And so this data splitting helps a good bit with that. I mentioned outcomes directly related to winning. Obviously, winning a game in hockey is an outcome related to winning, but we tend to prefer micro events. Goals, because there are so few in hockey relative to a sport like basketball, right? Goals is an outcome that we can use if we have large numbers of data, large numbers of games. But if we have a smaller set, we're more limited by using goals. So we often use shots or expected goals. I mentioned expected goals earlier. The acronym XG, they're often used for that. And then Corsi and Fenwick, which are unblocked shot attempts and all shot attempts there, respectively. And again, right, we are upping our sample size in terms of things that we know that can be related to winning. So we know that a team's percentage of Corsi events in the first half is related to how they win in the second half of a season. And so these things are viable outcomes when we're looking at doing some hockey research on the sorts of effects that you're going to be looking at, right? Zone entries, zone exits, power play, and penalty kill. Okay, the idea here, right? We think of this cause and outcome. but there's always the possibility that there's some other factor, right? And in statistics, we call that a confounder. And so one of the things in terms of doing research is to be able to look through and think through those confounders, because it's possible that they are leading to, right, the cause and the outcome. So, right, one thought here is, right, players and their core C4 percentage, right? Zone starts are different. So where a player starts their shift in a given situation affects, right, whether they're going to get shots off. So if a player is spending a lot of time starting in the offensive zone, then they're going to get more shots just by virtue of they're not having to work as hard, right, to bring the puck into the offensive zone and therefore to get shot attempts. Your quality of your teammates does the same thing, right? If I'm playing with Sidney Crosby, if I'm playing with Nathan McKinnon, if I'm playing with Connor McDavid, right, then I'm more likely to do well in terms of my shot attempts, right? So those sorts of things, right? I'm playing with Sarah Nurse. Those sorts of things are things that we want to try and account for. And there are statistical methods, primarily of sort of the regression family or the classification family of models that allow us to do some of that adjustment. Okay, so a little illustration here. I realized that I put wild illustration. It is not meant to be the Minnesota Wild here, but making up a somewhat silly example to sort of illustrate this idea of possible confounders. We're going to study goalie behavior in the trapezoid, right? So we've got some tracking data like you've got for the Big Data Cup, right? Every time the goalie is in the trapezoid, they have a choice. They can play the puck or they can leave it for the D, right? And so, you know, the question is, if I pick an outcome, right, as to whether a zone entry was successful based upon that goalie choice, right, I can get some measure of the decision-making for a goalie, okay? And so, yeah, play the puck in the trapezoid. Does that lead to a higher zone entry percentage? All right, so here's my first example, right? We're going to take Aiden Hill from Vegas, right? And the choices. I can play the puck in the trapezoid, or I can leave it, right? I can leave it for Martinez. I can leave it for Pietrangelo. I can leave it for McNabb, Shea Theodore, Nick Hague, right? Zach Whitecloud, right? So Aiden Hill's got a bunch of choices there, right? And they might make different choices depending upon, right, who is the D that they're leaving the puck for. By the way, I'm pulling this here late February from dailyfaceoff.com in terms of the players that are healthy. Shea Theodore being on my fantasy team, I know that Theodore's healthy again. So back in the lineup there. Alternatively, right, we can think of Kakkonen in San Jose and their choices, right? They can play the puck in the trapezoid, right? Or they can leave it for Ferraro, for Emberson, for Thrun, for Ruda, for Okhotyuk, right? Or Burroughs, right? Those are maybe some less good choices that they have in terms of who the puck leaves for. I think we could generally say, right, that their sort of average quality of D in Vegas is going to be higher than it is in San Jose. And I do note, don't send me emails, don't tweet at me, right? Vlasic is currently out of the lineup, right? Vlasic being a quality D here, certainly first or second pairing, I think, in San Jose among this group. So the big picture here is if we were going to assess the behavior of Kakkonen or the behavior of Hill in terms of, right, their decision making and how it leads to zone entry, we're going to have to account for the players that they're leaving it for. And there are methods and not time in this video, but certainly we've got time and you can look up and research some of the statistical methods that go into that. I'll highlight some of the work that's gone on by Brian McDonald and others in terms of right, ineffective math. So Micah Blake McCurdy, the Evolving Wild twins there, in terms of some of their methods that are accounting for players in this sort of scenario, this sort of somewhat silly scenario. I'm not convinced that playing the puck in the trapezoid very much is going to have an impact, but I think it does illustrate the sorts of things that we have to think about as we're going through. Okay. So a little bit here, right? In a non-found data world, if we had, right, statistical design, right, every player, or excuse me, every goalie would play the puck or leave in the same sort of ratio, right? We do equal ratios with every combinations of players, every opponent, and we might do this in some random order. That's a nice theoretical world, but I'll just highlight, right, there is a whole area of research on statistical design. And I think that there are some teams, some hockey teams, that do think about these sorts of things and try a lot of different combinations early in the season to get a handle on the sorts of things that work. Okay. So this is, right, impact of teammates, possibly unequal here, right? Certainly better account for teammates as part of sort of what my analysis. And again, I mentioned why we have regression and other statistical models. Okay. So little summary here, you're going to be working for the Big Data Cup in terms of zone entry, zone exits, and special teams. You want to think about the causes, right? What are the things that are driving them? What are the things that you can observe? And you think about alternatives and possible confounders, right? Things that are maybe affecting both what you think is the cause and what you think is the outcome. Check the reliability and the validity of those sorts of things. The other thing I want to point out, I didn't put it on the slides, but I think it is worth mentioning, is that if we find something, right, that is not causing, right, that is not leading to a differential in our outcome, that's often good information, right? That is things that we don't need to study again in the future, we maybe don't need to pay attention to. And those are sometimes called negative outcomes in research, but really they are valuable. And I think the research community valuing them more and more, right? Because the more of those we know that are out there, right, we don't have people going and saying, oh yeah, I want to study this because someone else has studied it and found there was nothing. So there you go. The other thing is, I would recommend, right, have fun. This is a fun data set. This is a fun project that you've got with the Big Data Cup. And so do that and then tell your story. And I think you're going to hear some videos or a video from my colleague, Allison Lucan, who is just tremendous in terms of telling stories with data and about data. And so with that, I will say thank you. There is my email. I'm also on Twitter at SchuckersM. Again, SCHUCKERS. But happy to answer any questions and looking forward to all of your submissions. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Lucan. I'm a data-driven storyteller and an on-air analyst with the Seattle Kraken right now out in Seattle in Washington State in the US. And I'm so excited to be here as part of the Big Data Cup organizing committee to share some insights on how you can make all the great work that you're about to do and take on and find and innovate with more palatable and more exciting and perhaps more interesting to the audiences that you're trying to share it with through this work in the project. If you haven't already, I definitely encourage you to watch Michael Schucker's piece that he has talked about just how to approach this project from an analysis perspective. But once you have those findings, hopefully this little talk here will be helpful as well. So let's get right into it. We all work in data, right? So many of us to varying degrees, depending on your role. For myself, I love to take the analytics underlying the game of hockey and translate them in relatable ways to both the viewers of our broadcast and also to the readers of our team website. But the problem is that when we are people like us who love data and who live in data, we often develop a whole different language that isn't necessarily as accessible as we think that it might be. And I love this cartoon from the far side. I'm probably dating myself here, but this is a great example of a problem we can get ourselves into where we're talking in a whole language that makes sense to us and that we're really excited about and that we want to communicate. But unfortunately, our audience doesn't always hear what we're trying to say. So that's the challenge that lies ahead of us. And what I suggest to you all is, as you prepare your findings and as you prepare your submission for the Big Data Cup, that you consider turning your findings into a story. I love this quote here. The difference between data and information is story. And you all can read, I'll leave this for you here, but it's all about this idea that when we wrap findings into a narrative and make it very accessible, we connect our readers or our viewers to the message that we're trying to send. So take some time after you do all of your hard work to find the story that you're trying to tell. So how do we do that? Well, hopefully I'm going to give you some very basic steps of how to start thinking about it. Obviously, first and foremost, we need the what. What are the findings that we're going to share? And what I suggest to you is when you're looking at the message that you want to send, we all know how this goes, right? We've done a project and we find all these incredible things and we've got 15 great ideas and we want to share them all. And I know for myself, if I'm preparing an article or preparing a piece I want to do on air, I realize I don't have enough time and or my viewers don't have enough attention span to hear all the things that I want to share with them, even if I think they're the coolest in the world. So when you're thinking about what you want to communicate, can you narrow it down to one concept or one player or one team or one actual point or question that you're trying to answer? Once you have your one concept, take the time to dig into that concept, develop your approach, make sure you understand how you're doing your analysis and also what you believe you have found through your analysis. And then just as important, confirm your findings. We've all been in that situation, right? Where we're like, oh, this is the answer. And then we double check it. We say, oh my gosh, I am so glad I did that. As annoying as it was, if I hadn't, it would have been a big problem. And as I talked about, we all know there's 15 other things that we may want to share or 15 other things that may or may not also impact the specific concrete point that we wanted to share. Just acknowledge that those points exist. That shows that you're aware of them. You're aware of strengths and weaknesses of your analysis or of your argument. You know they exist, but you're keeping your focus narrow, concrete, and clear. After you know your focus, now we want to get into the why. We want to put all the work into this kind of translation and effort. Think about what the point of your message is. And I would suggest there are a couple avenues or a couple overarching purposes of the research that you're doing. Are you looking to educate your audience? Maybe you're trying to teach them something that they didn't previously know. Maybe you're seeking adoption. You have this great concept and you've seen that it would work, but it's not catching on. Maybe it's in hockey or maybe it's something else. Maybe this is all about adoption and therefore this is about convincing, educating, and then really trying to push an idea or an agenda onto a trial basis or maybe full acceptance. Or is this about analysis, finding things that worked, finding things that didn't work, or raising areas that maybe aren't looking at the things that we think that they are? So think about your why and let that guide the way in which you communicate. So now we need to think about our who. We know what we're talking about. We know why we're talking about it. But I would suggest this is arguably one of the most important questions that you need to ask yourself when you're preparing your presentation. Remember that your audience dictates your language. If I'm on air talking to a broad fan base, I'm going to use very different language and very different presentation methods than if I'm talking to a bunch of hockey scouts or hockey analysts. And perhaps I'm going to use an even different set of language or presentation methodologies if I'm talking to a bunch of data scientists. So I would encourage you to take some time and think about what kind of audience you're going to have when you prepare your presentation for the Big Data Cup and tailor your messaging to them. I love this quote. This is, again, a little bit older now, but The Good Place is always a great show. And if you haven't watched it, I encourage you to do so. But this says, thinking about the good place and how it's an object lesson that if you want to fix a broken system, you have to rely on the people directly impacted by the system for input and guidance. So as you're developing your work, if you have questions, reach out to us. We will try and give you some information on how we're looking for information, what kind of information we are looking at, but try to translate messaging back to an audience in a mindset, and most importantly, in a language that they already use and are comfortable with. So how do we do that? Well, this is where the fun begins. If we've all seen that movie Castaway, you may remember this volleyball who's out there with Tom Hanks. He's stranded alone on a desert island, and he has a volleyball, and he turns it into his friend, and he gives this inanimate object a personality and a voice, and it truly becomes part of therapy, sanity, whatever you want to call it. And that's what I suggest you think about when you have come to your findings for your project. What is the voice that you want to give to your data? Again, back to that idea of a story. And I mentioned this just a minute ago. How do you translate that message into a voice that is going to connect to your audience? Let's dig into that a little bit more. Again, when you are sharing a message, we've already considered who we're communicating with. So now we need to speak in their language, not just in our language. If we speak in our recipient audience's language, they're going to receive it and understand it much more clearly. So know your stuff. Make sure that you are very, very comfortable and understanding of your analyses. And as we already talked about, that doesn't mean that you have to be right about everything. It doesn't mean that you have to have addressed everything. You've already done the work we've talked about, and you are very confident and crystal clear on what you have found through the work for the Big Data Cup. And then, as we've mentioned, how does your audience like information? Speak their language, know what they value, and very, very important, as you know, we're going to have some time limitations on this, respect their time. And if you're ever doing this in a live format as well, make sure to start on time and end on time. So, so crucial. Be ready to learn. If you're thinking about the audience that you're working with, and for example, when I'm communicating with players or coaches, I might go into a conversation thinking I know something about a concept or calling something a certain way, and come to find out that the people I want to communicate with call it something different, or think about it differently, or don't value something that I thought they did. We have to be willing to learn those lessons about how we need to communicate as much as we need to be ready to learn those lessons about our findings. And to that point, be ready to be wrong. We can always have situations where we're fully sure that something will work. And oftentimes the best lessons and the best advancement of an idea forward is when someone challenges us or shows us maybe what we should think about next or didn't think about enough to start. When you're doing translation, I would also encourage you to sit back and say, does this make sense? And I would encourage you to make sure that you are really sticking to that what you wanted to communicate and why throughout your entire presentation. So let's take some more examples of that. In this instance, of course, we're going to have findings and detailed papers. We've done a tremendous amount of work, but I'm going to encourage you to maybe think about different ways to communicate. Can we turn 1,000 words into a picture? Reverse that saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, 1,000 words is worth a picture. How can you share your message differently to make sure that you're communicating in an interesting and engaging way with your audience? When you do that, if you're using visualizations, which I strongly encourage, again, does it make sense? Does it show what I think it's showing? Will people understand what I'm trying to convey? How will my audience view this, and how does it look? And on that point specifically, make sure to consider the concerns of our colorblinded friends. Will they be able to take in the full spectrum of what we're trying to show? And if we're using colors that just aren't easy to discern or make sense of, how can we change them, and how can we make things aesthetically pleasing as well? And finally, make sure to use what's right and not just what's cool. I tell this story all the time that a few years ago when I was breaking into R, I was really trying to figure out how to do a lollipop graph, and I finally figured it out, but it wasn't sorting the way that I needed it to. But I wanted to use the darn thing because that was what I had learned, and it was cool, and it showed that I'd done something interesting. And in the end, it turned out that a Tableau graph that I could manipulate and make it sort and present exactly the way I needed it to tell the story that I needed was exactly the right answer. And remember too, that when we use visualizations or pictures or any sort of different way to communicate all these thoughts succinctly and clearly and quickly, we can do this in a couple different levels. We can do this at the player level, if that's where your analysis lies. We can do this at the team level. We can also do comparisons. And we can also look over periods of time. So allow yourself to find different ways that visualizations can help you tell the story and make the points that you're trying to make. Don't forget also that video is a powerful, powerful tool. When I'm on broadcast, I use this all the time. I'll explain my point and then use video with or without markups to show exactly the concept that I'm trying to show. Let's take a little bit of a look at an example here from last year's broadcast. So there you go. Just a couple examples of where not just video, but also some visualizations made points that I probably would have taken more than a few hundred words to explain and probably not as clearly. Oh, excuse me. So let's come to our final step, putting it all together. And this is what you're going to want to be thinking about as you come to your final presentation and submission that you make as part of the Big Data Cup. And I'm going to give you an example of a concept that I was educating our fan base on, and that was passes across the Royal Road or down the middle of the zone, as you can see illustrated here in this graphic. When I was educating people on what this idea was, I did it in a couple different ways. I did have a written component where I explained the concept so that it could go on a forum like the website, where that's the accepted and preferred method of communication. But then when it came to different methods and different instances in time, like mid-game, I went onto Twitter and I would insert film clips to again reinforce the concepts that I was trying to educate them on, but this time using a different methodology to get that across. And then finally, again, we can use in broadcast all of those pieces put together. Let's take a look at another example. So there you go. A couple different ways to think about not just going to that written word, but using different methodologies, different mediums, and different forums to tell stories. So let's put this all together with some final things to keep in mind as you're compiling your presentation and submission. Please make sure that you're not a black box. We do want to know what work you did and what your findings were and what your process was. If you just say, aha, it is this, we need to know that you understand your why and how, and you need to communicate that succinctly. As I mentioned before, make sure you understand what it is you're presenting. Take the time to be confident and comfortable with all of your work and all of your findings, and even all of your outstanding and remaining questions or caveats. Don't forget to translate. Turn your messaging into something that's digestible and interesting to your audience, and slow down. Often by the time we finished a huge project like this, we've done so much work that we're intimately familiar with our data, we're intimately familiar with our process, and we're just going to roll right through everything. Remember that when you're presenting this, it's often a first or maybe second encounter with your work. So take the time to slow down and let your efforts and your messaging sink into your audience. And finally, I encourage you, particularly before you do send us in your submission, to consider using a feedback loop. Practice. Show your presentation to a colleague or a friend or a family member and listen to all of their feedback, even the negative. A mentor of mine many years ago told me that even in every of the most nonsensical negative points of feedback, there's always a nugget of truth. Allow yourself the humility to find that. It will make your content better. Also, ask the people that you practice with or present to what resonates with them. See if what you wanted to say is what in fact they heard and what stuck with them. And on the other side of that coin, find out what was misinterpreted. How do you need to tell a point differently, or what messaging didn't get across? Make sure that your communication style jives, your translation, your audience understanding connects your message to those who you're presenting to. And if you are frustrated, if you get negative feedback, go ahead and vent about that, but keep that private and explain the loopholes or the things you missed or the things that were misinterpreted publicly. Keep that frustration in-house. To your friends, we all need that trusted resource and ally. Some final do's and do nots for you all. Make friends with people smarter than you. That is how we learn. That is how we get better. As you're going through this process, don't hesitate to reach out to mentors or let us know if you have a question and we'll see if we can help out, or make sure that you're bouncing ideas off people who can help you grow with their feedback and direction. Use the best tools that you can and double, triple, quadruple check your work. We talked about this already, but we all know this, that if a mistake is made, particularly if it's glaring, that invalidates so much of the effort that you put not just into your research, but into your presentation as a whole. And finally, cite, cite, cite. This is going to be a quick turnaround project in the grand scheme of things, and we recognize that we stand on the shoulders of other work that came before us, and maybe we use other tools or resources developed by others who came before us. That's amazing. Go for it. Just make sure you give those people their credit as well. My friends, here is my information. If you have any follow-up questions about the best way to tell your story of your project and your findings, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would ask that you please use Big Data Cup in your subject line if you're using email, so I'm best able to find your message and get back to you in a timely manner. But I wish you all very well. We're so thankful that you're participating with us this year, and I can't wait to see the incredible work that you will do.